Greetings to all our viewers tuning into our channel. There are some numbers that, when spoken aloud, need no further explanation. They're enough to make you stop and think. $7.4 billion is one of those numbers. It's not the cost of buying a new fleet of fighter jets, it's not a budget for upgrading technology, and it's not an investment for the future. It's simply fuel. Money to burn. Money spent to sustain a choice we once signed off on. A choice we now have to live with for the next 4 decades. Now imagine that bill didn't just sit buried in a dry defense report, but instead lay spread out across the kitchen table of every Canadian household. Each year, a quiet little line item silently drawing away funds meant for healthcare, education, infrastructure, and the very northern communities we claim need our protection the most. No fanfare, no emergencies, just steady, relentless drain like a winter that refuses to end. We're often reassured that this is the price of security, that cutting-edge technology always comes with a high price tag, that when it comes to sovereignty, you can't count every penny. But the real question isn't whether secure's worth the cost. The real question is, what exactly are we paying for, and for how long? In March 2024, beneath the cold, gray skies over the Baltics, a brief moment quietly reframed that entire conversation. No explosions, no flashy footage, just a standard combat scenario in which a fighter jet designed with a philosophy of thrift, endurance, and practicality did something many believed only a fifth-generation aircraft could do. It accelerated, held speed, and left without needing a complicated explanation. That moment didn't make the F-35 obsolete, but it did expose an uncomfortable truth. Stealth, once seen as a silver bullet, no longer guarantees victory. As sensors get smarter, as data gets shared in real time, and as the skies become less about lightning-fast dogfights and more about lasting presence, the question is no longer who disappears first, but who can stay in the fight longer. For Canada, a country tasked with guarding vast, frozen, and remote airspace, endurance isn't some academic concept. It's a matter of survival. And from that seemingly lifeless $7.4 billion fuel bill, a larger question emerges. In an age where wars no longer end on day one, are we placing too big a bet on an advantage that may already be fading, the advantage of stealth? For many years, stealth has been told more like a myth than a piece of engineering. People spoke of it with firm conviction, almost absolute. To go unseen was to be unbeatable. Whoever had better stealth would win. The defense world became so accustomed to that logic, it rarely stopped to ask, what happens when stealth is no longer exclusive? The truth is, stealth hasn't disappeared, but its edge is quietly, relentlessly being worn down. Not by one single breakthrough, but by a layered buildup of seemingly small things. Long-range infrared sensors don't need to emit a signal to spot heat trails. Low-band radars don't need a crisp image, just confirmation that something is there. Fused data networks don't require a single platform to see the target. As long as someone somewhere in the system sees it, that's enough. In this context, stealth is no longer a magical cloak of invisibility. It becomes a layer of probability reduction. A quantitative edge, no longer a qualitative one. Yes, you're harder to detect, but you're not invisible. And once you've been seen enough, the fight shifts to a different playing field, one where radar-absorbing coatings no longer matter much. That's the moment when physics takes back control. Thrust, weight, fuel consumption, time in the air, the distance you can cover before heading home. In a prolonged encounter, no one cares how sleek your stealth is. What matters is whether you're still in the sky. The March 2024 event over the Baltic wasn't a dogfight in the cinematic sense. There were no target locks or missile launches, and that's exactly why it reflected modern warfare so starkly. When a fighter can accelerate faster, hold high speeds longer, and do it while burning less fuel, it wins the most valuable asset: control of tempo. It decides when to engage, when to withdraw, and most importantly, how often it can repeat that cycle. For Canada, this goes far beyond a technical comparison. Our airspace isn't a tight zone filled with bases and logistics. It's vast, cold, remote, and sparsely populated. Out there, every minute in the air is a strategic decision. Stealth might get you through the first moment, but no amount of stealth will keep you around if you're burning through fuel too fast. Modern warfare is looking less and less like a series of knockout punches, and more like a brutal marathon. In that race, the side that burns out first will lose, no matter how impressive their start. And it's here that stealth begins to reveal its biggest limitation. It's expensive, it's complex, and it comes with a long list of trade-offs that not every nation can afford. When stealth is no longer absolute, when the skies reward endurance over moments, the center of air power has no choice but to shift. It moves away from the surface of materials, deep into the frame of the aircraft, into the place less flashy, less talked about, but where everything is decided, the fighter's heart. The engine. Because in the end, when stealth is only part of the equation, the biggest question is no longer how hard you are to detect, but how fast, how far, and how long you can fly while surviving the cost. And it's right at that crossroads where two entirely different engine philosophies, brute force versus smart efficiency, begin to reveal the line between flashy technology and real, lasting capability. In the history of military aviation, every generation of fighter jets carries the unmistakable mark of the era that gave birth to it, and no part reflects that more clearly than the engine. The engine isn't just what pushes an aircraft into the sky, it's the answer to a fundamental question. How does a nation believe war will be fought? There were times when raw power was glorified above all else. The more thrust, the better. The more payload, the safer. Engines were designed as a show of strength, a declaration that we can build the most powerful machines, no matter how complex. That philosophy produced impressive engines on paper, with stats that could humble any comparison chart. But there was also another path. Quieter, less flashy. A path that asked the opposite question. What happens after takeoff? What happens when a jet has to fly day after day in bad weather from imperfect runways with a maintenance crew that isn't always fully staffed? What happens when war doesn't end in the first week? That philosophy doesn't chase max numbers. It seeks balance. Not the most powerful, but powerful enough in every condition. Not the most sophisticated, but the one that still runs when everything else starts to crack. The difference between these two philosophies doesn't show up in the lab. It reveals itself when the aircraft is fully fueled, armed to the teeth, and has to launch in freezing winds, thick snow, and poor visibility. On paper, everything looks perfect, but in reality, every extra kilogram eats into thrust-to-weight ratio. Every auxiliary system drains more fuel. Every maintenance requirement stretches ground time. At that point, the engine is no longer a single figure. It becomes the center of a chain reaction. Higher fuel burn means shorter time in the air. Shorter time in the air means more sorties. More sorties require bigger budgets, more personnel, more infrastructure. And just like that, the cost spiral tightens. On the other hand, an engine optimized for efficiency creates a completely different logic. When fuel consumption is kept in check, each mission lasts longer. When missions last longer, fewer sorties are needed. When the operational pace becomes sustainable, the pressure on people and budgets eases. It doesn't make headlines, but it determines whether an air force can endure a long war. For Canada, this difference isn't theoretical. We don't have the luxury of dense bases, mild climates, or short supply chains. We fly far, we fly cold, and we fly in conditions where even the smallest miscalculation comes at a cost, in real money, real time, and real risk. In that context, an engine that demands more than it gives isn't a symbol of strength, it's a silent burden. There's a truth rarely said out loud in public debates. The more complex an engine is, the less its cost is about the purchase price, and the more it's about every hour of flight that follows. Every flight hour means not just fuel, but wear and tear, spare parts, labor, and a supply chain that must run smoothly without fail. When one link breaks down, the whole system slows. And it's right here that the philosophy of smart efficiency reveals its true strategic power. It doesn't aim to win in a single moment. It aims to not lose over a drawn-out campaign. It doesn't bet on perfection. It bets on endurance. Looking back, we begin to see clearly why the engine debate cannot be separated from the budget conversation, because every technical decision leaves a direct trace on the nation's balance sheet, and when an engine demands more, that sheet swells, relentlessly. From here, the story moves beyond design philosophy. It slips into another battleground, colder, but no less decisive. This is the moment when technical figures transform into budget lines, when every liter of fuel burned is no longer just a logistical detail, but a strategic vulnerability. And it's from the heart of the fighter jet, the engine, that the path to that $7.4 billion bill begins to emerge, unmistakable and impossible to ignore. $7.4 billion might sound like an abstract figure, a massive block of money tucked away in spreadsheets that few people ever truly confront. But in defense, no dollar is abstract. Every dollar has a very real shape: a flight hour cut, a patrol shortened, a pilot receiving less training, a base stretched thinner. When people say it's just fuel costs, that hides a deeper truth. Fuel is the heartbeat of air power. Over the full lifespan of a fighter fleet, the cost of buying the aircraft is just the opening act. The real expense begins after that, quietly and irreversibly. Every flight hour burns money, but not all platforms burn the same. When fuel consumption is higher to complete the same mission, that difference doesn't fade, it accumulates. Year after year, those small margins snowball into a strategic burden. In that light, $7.4 billion is no longer a shocking number. It's the inevitable result of a series of choices. It reflects an operational philosophy built on assumptions that the budget will always be sufficient, that political priorities won't shift, that no crisis will demand austerity. But Canada's history tells a different story. Our defense budget is constantly stretched, pulled between domestic security, international obligations, and growing social pressures. In that environment, any platform that consumes more than necessary becomes a vulnerability in itself. The real danger of fuel costs isn't in the number itself, it's in how it forces difficult decisions. When budgets tighten, the first cuts rarely come from procurement, they come from operations. Flight hours go down, training sorties are reduced, pilots slowly lose the constant flying rhythm, something no simulator can truly replicate. Capability doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes quietly, steadily, and with devastating certainty. An Air Force limited by operating costs is like an athlete forced to train less than their opponent. On paper, they still have top-tier equipment, but in reality, they enter the competition with shorter breath, less stamina, and far less margin for error. In a prolonged conflict, that's the shortest path to defeat. For Canada, this issue is even more serious because of geography. Our airspace doesn't allow for short, convenient flights. Every patrol over the north is a long journey, demanding in both time and fuel. When the cost per flight hour rises, the consequence isn't just fewer flights, it's less presence. And in national security, presence is the strongest deterrent message you can send. There's a bitter irony here. We're spending more to acquire a platform marketed as optimal for modern warfare, yet its very operating cost limits its use in the exact scenario Canada faces most. Not a short war far from home, but a long, cold, relentless watch over our own territory. When budgets become a weakness, the enemy doesn't need to shoot your aircraft down. They only need to wait. Wait for financial pressure to slow your tempo. Wait until presence thins out. In that game, fuel becomes an invisible weapon, and $7.4 billion becomes the price of losing the initiative. And then, as the numbers on spreadsheets turn into real-world decisions, another factor emerges. Harsher, more unforgiving than any budget model: the environment. Because in the end, every cost comparison must face one simple, brutal question. Can this platform truly withstand the place it's meant to operate in? When icy winds sweep across frozen runways, when snow buries equipment, and every takeoff is a survival test, budget and engineering alike must bow to the climate. And that's when Canada is forced to remember a plain but often forgotten truth. The Arctic is not a desert, and nature is the real proving ground. There's a common misconception when people talk about military power, the belief that modern technology can overcome all natural conditions. But history, from Napoleon to World War II, has repeated a cold, hard lesson. Nature never sides with the complacent. And for Canada, nature has a name: the Arctic. The Arctic isn't some blank, lifeless space on the map. It's a living, brutal, and unforgiving environment. Thin, frigid air bites into metal. Low temperatures make materials brittle, thicken lubricants, and drain batteries at alarming speeds. Snow and ice don't just coat runways, they creep into every seam, every joint, every system that was supposedly sealed to perfection. In those conditions, what works smoothly in test chambers or mild climate bases begins to show its limits. The more sophisticated a system is, the more vulnerable it becomes to deviation. Every sensor, every specialized coating, Every complex maintenance protocol becomes a potential failure point when the temperature drops and the weather turns. Canada doesn't have the luxury of choosing its battle space. We can't move the Arctic somewhere warmer. We can't wait for perfect weather to assert sovereignty. Our aircraft must take off when needed, not when conditions are ideal. And that's when the difference between can operate and was built to operate becomes a matter of survival. Platforms designed for expeditionary warfare often assume robust infrastructure, large technical crews, and seamless supply chains. But in the north, many bases are remote, hard to resupply, and slow to respond, not by incompetence, but by sheer geographic distance. Up there, every added maintenance requirement, every environmental sensitivity comes at a cost, in time and in risk. In contrast, some design philosophies start with a healthy obsession with climate. Not to build the most beautiful machine, but the one that complains the least, one that can operate in snow, high winds, low light, and on imperfect runways. These choices don't shine in brochures, but they deliver something far more valuable: reliability, a trait more critical than any max performance stat when you're standing in sub-zero wind. In the Arctic, every time an aircraft is grounded due to weather or maintenance, it's not just a technical hiccup. It creates a gap in the sky, and that gap, however brief, is a signal. Presence has been interrupted. In the power game, where deterrence depends on always being there, interruption is weakness. Climate, then, is not just a backdrop. It's the real test. It forces every tech claim to prove itself under the harshest conditions. And it doesn't care about reputation or price tag, only about what still works when everything else begins to freeze. It's right here that another question quietly emerges, one that ties climate to sovereignty. When an aircraft breaks down in extreme conditions, who fixes it? How long does it take to get it back in the air? And can Canada do it on our own, or do we have to wait for help from outside? Because in the Arctic cold, time isn't measured in minutes. It's measured in control. And sometimes just 58 minutes or more is all it takes to draw the line between owning your skies and waiting on someone else to take them back. 58 minutes doesn't sound like much to those used to viewing war through wide campaign maps and sweeping arrows. It's too small to make a headline, too mundane to warrant space in a policy brief. But in real-world military operations, 58 minutes can mark the line between presence and absence, between control and reaction, between true sovereignty and sovereignty only on paper. In Airpower, repair time isn't just a technical metric, it's a measure of autonomy. A platform that can be restored to combat-ready status in under an hour doesn't just enable a faster tempo. It gives the nation that owns it the right to set its own rhythm. No waiting, no permission needed, no adjusting plans to fit a supply chain controlled beyond its borders. On the other hand, when every minor malfunction triggers hours or even days of waiting, military strength begins to slip from the operator's hands. Not due to a lack of courage or skill, but because control has quietly shifted, handed over to shipping schedules, to foreign technicians, to procedures you can't fast track, no matter how urgent the situation on the ground. In the Arctic, this becomes even more sensitive. Long distances and brutal weather turn every minute of delay into a strategic void. When a plane is grounded, it's not just one asset taken out of action, it's a stretch of airspace left unguarded. A deterrent message weakened, a question mark hanging over real response capability. Sovereignty in this context is no longer an abstract notion tied to flags and declarations. It's in the hands of the technicians standing on an icy runway, tools in hand, racing against time. The nation that enables its own people to repair, replace, and restore combat capability with its own resources is the nation that truly owns its military strength. A nation that must wait for outside help, even in so-called non-critical situations, has already surrendered part of its self-determination. The irony is that the most complex systems are often marketed as symbols of strategic independence. But the more complex they are, the more they require subtle forms of dependence. Dependence on remote software updates, on proprietary parts, on procedures only the manufacturer fully controls. This dependence is quiet. It doesn't show on the surface, but it defines the limits of action at the moments that matter most. 58 minutes, then, isn't just a technical benchmark. It's a political statement. It says that when something goes wrong, Canada doesn't need to look outward and ask when it can resume its mission. It says that control isn't suspended in some legal or logistical limbo. It's grounded at the front line. And yet, even when a nation masters its repair time and controls its operational tempo, a larger question still looms. Because modern wars are rarely decided by a day, a week, or even a single tactical edge. Recent history has shown that assumptions about decisive first strikes are growing increasingly fragile. As conflicts drag on, as tempo becomes the ultimate test of survival, every standalone advantage is slowly tested by the passage of time. And it's exactly at that crossroads where the story extends beyond the 58 minutes of a single repair. It becomes a bigger equation of endurance, of sustained tempo, of how long an Air Force can remain effective before fatigue, cost, and wear begin to take over. That's where the first day mindset collapses, and the demands of long war force every decision to answer the most brutal question of all: who will still be standing in the end? For decades, modern military thinking has been captivated by a seductive idea: the first day. The first day of war, when every technological advantage is unleashed, when the side that strikes first, harder, and with more precision supposedly shapes the entire outcome. Glitzy presentations, flawless simulations, and flashy weapons campaigns all orbit around that moment. The first day is drawn as the moment that decides everything. But the reality of the 21st century is quietly unraveling that illusion. No major conflict in recent years has played out according to the opening strike scenario. No matter how overwhelming the initial advantage, every war has eventually slipped into something more familiar and far more brutal: a war of attrition. When the smoke of the first day clears, what remains isn't the most advanced systems, but the ability to sustain tempo, to absorb losses, to keep flying, to keep training, to keep showing up. At that stage, the shine of early advantages begins to fade. Stealth is no longer the ultimate answer. Sensors are adapted, tactics evolve. The enemy learns to live with the threat. And as the conflict stretches on, what matters isn't what you did in the first 48 hours, but what you can still do on day 30, day 300, or year 3. For Air Forces, this is the harshest test. Pilots can't stay sharp if flight hours are slashed. Technicians can't keep pace if the maintenance cycle is overloaded. Aircraft, no matter how modern, can't escape wear and tear. In long wars, every platform becomes ordinary in a cold, sobering way. It must endure, not dazzle. Canada, in this context, has no room for illusions. We're not preparing for a short showcase conflict. We're preparing to maintain steady presence over a massive territory for years under relentless budget pressure. Every procurement decision, therefore, is not just a choice for day one, it's a commitment for thousands of days to follow. Prolonged conflict also exposes another uncomfortable truth. The more complex a system is, the harder it is to sustain at high tempo. Platforms optimized for that dazzling early advantage often burn out faster when forced into constant operation. In contrast, designs focused on efficiency, maintainability, and steady rhythm might not impress at first glance, but they last. Here, the collapse of the first day mindset doesn't come with some grand announcement. It happens quietly through each cut to flight hours, each delayed maintenance cycle, each budget strain that forces short-term prioritization. And at some point, it becomes clear that initial edge isn't enough to compensate for long-term exhaustion. Modern warfare, in the end, doesn't reward the flashiest side. It rewards the toughest. The side that understands victory doesn't come from a perfect moment, but from thousands of good enough moments, repeated relentlessly. And when you view the world through that lens, every question about technology, cost, and design philosophy narrows to a single defining point: how long can you keep going when the fight refuses to end? In the end, when all the layers of analysis are peeled back, this story isn't about which jet looks better on a brochure or which one dazzles more during a demo. It comes down to a simple but weighty question: what does Canada want to carry into the next 40 years? A symbol to showcase technological pride, or a tool built to work every day in the cold wind within real budgets and through scenarios no one hopes for, but everyone must prepare for? A symbol will always carry its own appeal. It promises superiority, modernity, the feeling of standing on the right side of technological history. But symbols come with a price. They demand constant upkeep, a willingness to accept subtle dependencies, and faith that ideal conditions will always be there. A tool, on the other hand, is rougher, humbler, and rarely inspires awe. But tools are made to work, not to be admired. They exist to solve problems, not to tell a pretty story. $7.4 billion ultimately is not just money. It's a measure of our priorities. It shows whether we value the moment or the journey, whether we believe in short bursts of dominance or in long-term endurance. And in the context of Canada, a vast country with a harsh climate and a budget that must constantly balance competing social needs, that choice carries more weight than any technical debate. No decision is perfect. Every path comes with trade-offs. But some trade-offs align with our reality, and others only with the image we wish to project. When facing the Arctic, vast distances, and conflicts that could last far longer than anyone expects, Canada needs more than a symbol. Canada needs a capability that can endure, repeat, and persist. The real question isn't whether we can afford the most expensive option. The question is whether we have the discipline to choose the right one. And that's a question every taxpayer, every citizen who cares about sovereignty and national security has the right to ask. What about you? Do you think Canada should invest in a high-tech symbol or a rugged tool for the long haul? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this analysis valuable, don't forget to subscribe so we can keep having honest conversations about the choices that will shape our country for decades to come.